Hey guys, alright, today we're going to be watching a very special Christmas themed episode because it's Christmas. Well, it's actually Christmas Eve when I'm recording this because I realized that I did not record a Christmas reaction. So here I am doing it pretty last minute. This one's the WW1 Christmas Truce Silent Night by Extra History. Or well, Extra History by Extra Credits. And we've got a special themed Christmas sweater going on here. We got, the man, the myth, the legend, the greatest character of all time, himself, R2 fucking D2. I don't know if the camera can see this because this camera is pretty cheap. So, I don't know. Hold up. There. Can you see it? Good? We're good. Okay. Alright, now I'm gonna scooch in closer to the camera there so I can better see and hear. So let's go ahead and start watching this. I wanted to find a different one because I know this video is, well, it's pretty popular. So I'm certain a lot of other reaction channels are doing this around this time of the year as well. So I tried to find something different, but I couldn't really find just a general history of Christmas video that was popular. So like, we're gonna go with this. I mean, if you guys know of any, comment them down below and I'll save them for next year if I'm still here. Anyways, enough fooling around. Let's go ahead and hear about the Christmas Truce, the good old soccer game.
Christmas Eve.
Oh man, that's loud.
1914. The war was supposed to be over by now.
Yeah, they're supposed to be home by Christmas.
This little holiday special is brought to you by World of Tanks. Use the invite code ARMISTICE if you're a new player who wants to check out the game. The Christmas Truce is one of the most poignant events of the First World War, a time when...
It's also one of the events in history that's like most often, when people are trying to find something positive to talk about when it comes to war, or they try to show the humanity inside of the bloody conflict that is war, this is honestly the event that gets mentioned the most. It's this event, and then also that time that Liechtenstein went to war and came back with a friend, where they marched into Italy with 80 people and came back with one more with 81. Those two moments are the ones that are talked about from my experience the most when it comes to humanity and friendship and war and whatnot.
Men rose up above the madness of the conflict and, for just a moment, saw each other as fellow humans. This is an event that definitely...
Wasn't it the... Can't remember which side, but one of the sides started playing a game of soccer. I'm American, so I'm going to call it soccer. Fight me. Wasn't it one of the sides playing it, and then the other side saw, and then they were like, hey, we want to play too. And then they played.
Did happen. Thousands of men laid down arms in the truce, but a century of retellings has also kind of sanded down its rough edges and oversimplified its messy reality.
Yeah, that's what you gotta do.
Indeed, this event wasn't just the result of pure human spirit and holiday cheer. It was a host of unique factors that drove these enemies to spontaneously declare peace in no man's land.
Well, they also kind of didn't really want to fight each other. Back then, I mean, there was certainly propaganda, but I think in the early days of the war, the propaganda hadn't reached the point of monsterizing the enemy just quite yet in the general view. And so I think by this point in time, the people fighting this war knew that they were fighting people much like them. And also around Christmas time, you just don't want to fight because it's Christmas. Time for cheer.
And really, it may not have been all that spontaneous. Small armistices were happening every day. As frontline troops became accustomed to the rhythms of trench warfare, they learned that looking the other way now and then could bring a shred of safety and calm to their lives. The armies ate meals at the same time, which became a daily ceasefire. Patrols frequently ignored each other, adopting a live and let live attitude. Troops often shouted to each other across the lines. After all, the autumn battles had passed, and both sides were waiting out the winter.
Yeah.
In reality, the weather was the primary enemy for both sides. The high water table at Flanders meant that the trenches were all...
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. For one, armies don't really fight during the winter. Usually, it's changed now with modern war, where now war is fought pretty much year round. But in World War One and before World War One, there really wasn't much movement in winter. There wouldn't be much movement, which is why sometimes decisive or surprise attacks happen during the winter, because like, oh hey, no one's expecting an attack in winter most of the time. So winter was a time period of resting and waiting it out, because you don't want to get caught in like a surprise winter storm, because that could absolutely ruin you and your chances for the spring conflict. So them taking like a general armistice, an unspoken agreement of not wanting to fight during the winter makes a lot of sense.
always filling with water, sometimes collapsing and burying men inside. Soldiers leaned against the walls to sleep, trying to keep themselves out of the wet. Food supplies had to be hung up on dugout ceilings. And that winter...
It wasn't just the water that was the reason they had to hang them up. They also had to hang them up because rats. But then again, rats, they'd climb up and get in there sometimes anyways. But, water, rats, both things were reasons to hang it up.
Had been particularly miserable. Weeks of rain flooded the dugouts. The mud pulled men down like quicksand. Now, British Field Marshal Sir John French had noticed the hands-off attitude his men were developing towards the enemy, and so he ordered attacks in late December to boost morale, and this resulted in heavy British losses. Concerned about possible fraternization over the holiday, he issued orders that no unofficial armistice would be tolerated.
Asshole.
Morale was much better over in the German trenches. After all, they were winning. But many men were also experiencing their first holiday away from home. Knowing that this would be difficult, commanders brought Christmas to the trenches, shipping thousands of presents to the field. Each man received a gift from the Kaiser. Cigar boxes for NCOs, a pipe with the Crown Prince on it for the ranks. The British, for their part, received a brass box from Princess Mary filled with cigarettes, tobacco, a Christmas card, and sweets. And then there were personal packages. Enterprises sprang up on the home front, offering family members a chance to send gift boxes to the troops. British soldiers received plum puddings and 1,000-count boxes of cigarettes.
Damn.
German and Austrian troops were bombarded with chocolate and salami and cognac. Both sides received winter clothing. In truth, though, the gifts were kind of a nuisance. I mean, there was nowhere to put it all. Soldiers didn't have a place to store 1,000 extra cigarettes. But that Christmas Eve delivered a true gift. The rain stopped, and the trenches drained. Dry cold froze the mud into a hard surface, almost like a floor. Snow dusted the countryside. That afternoon, the gunfire dwindled, and in some sectors it stopped entirely. The weather just seemed too nice for it. The Germans, stuffed with Christmas chocolate and cheered by the weather, started putting lit Tannenbaum up on their trench parapets. And then, the German line started singing. Over on the British parapets, watchmen of the Scots Guard saw lines of lights along the enemy trench. At first they suspected an attack, but then they heard an ethereal sound drifting across no man's land. Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht, the original Austrian version of Silent Night. Sensing a challenge, Guards Officer Lieutenant Sir Edward Hulse decided that they should drown this out with their own carol. The sides went back and forth, but soon the competition merged into a harmony of Good King Wenceslas and Auld Lang Syne. The men began shouting Christmas greetings across the line, jokingly at first. A few even stepped out to talk. Hulse didn't know it, but the same thing was happening up and down the entire British line. Agreements formed. In some sectors, the officers met at the wire and shook hands, agreeing to cease hostilities the next day. In other areas, the ranks took the lead, Germans shouting across no man's land, "English, tomorrow if you no shoot, we no shoot." At times, it was just one brave soul walking into no man's land waving a newspaper. These overtures were extremely dangerous. Though peace was breaking out in certain areas, it didn't happen everywhere. One British regiment responded to German caroling with a machine gun blast. Some unarmed soldiers were gunned down trying to broker this holiday armistice. But in
Wow.
most sectors, the ceasefire held. This truce mostly happened between German and British units. The French and the Belgians, whose countries were under German occupation, were less inclined.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I didn't think about that, but that's reasonable. That's reasonable.
There were agreements to bury the dead and cease hostilities, but not as much fraternization. Yet a Bavarian unit held fire during a French mass, and both sides halted fighting long enough for a guest, a soloist from the Paris Opera, to make a performance. British Indian troops, who were a bit unfamiliar with this whole Christmas deal, saw the lit German trees and thought of their own holiday of Diwali. They held fire, but also held position, until some Germans tempted them out of the trenches with cigars and cigarettes. Soon the men were smoking together on the parapet. That Christmas night, the troops slept in sublime quiet. Christmas Day dawned, bright and cold, the sky clear for the first time in weeks. To their shock, British troops looked across no man's land to see the Germans walking around on their parapets. Such a thing was suicidal in daylight, and that gesture of trust, more than anything, lured a few British out. It was heaven to at last stand up straight and walk on solid earth. Some had ventured into no man's land on Christmas Eve, but in daylight it was impossible to ignore the bodies lying between the trenches. The two sides buried their dead in common graves, grieving side by side in joint services, listening to the faraway sounds of battle from other sectors. And that shared experience broke down the wall. Soldiers milled about together in no man's land, swapping overabundant gifts from home. British beef for uniform buttons, chocolate cake for barrels of beer. They exchanged hats. One German barber gave haircuts.
Oh,
the men
nice.
Chatted. After all, they shared so much in common. They lived in the same fields
like
under
6
the
months.
same rain, and they were equally sick of war. Besides, they were curious. What was life like on the other side? Who were these enemies? One British officer was perplexed to learn that his new German friend believed the armies of the Kaiser fought for freedom. That was impossible, the officer responded. We're fighting for freedom. Amid this, Lieutenant Hulse found himself talking to Lieutenant Thomas of the 15th Westphalians, who had something to pass on, a Victoria Cross and a packet of letters. An English officer had died in the German trench during the last attack. Perhaps he could give these to the man's family? Touched, Hulse removed his own silk scarf, a gift from home, and presented it in thanks. Thomas, embarrassed that he had nothing to give in return, sent a soldier to fetch the fur gloves that his family had sent. Up and down the line, men started bringing out footballs. Kickabouts broke out, with men from both sides chasing the ball among shell holes and sliding on the frozen ground. In one sector, a group of Highlanders challenged a Saxon regiment, who burst out laughing whenever a kilt flew up during play. But not all of this activity was goodwill. On both sides, a few used the gatherings to reconnoiter enemy trenches, and both sides used the time to repair dugouts. Of course, for some, this fraternization appeared false. One British soldier flashed his squadmate a hidden dagger, while another refused to smoke German cigarettes, fearing that they might be poisoned. When one squad of Bavarians discussed whether to meet the British, their corporal snapped at them. Such a thing should not happen in wartime. Have you no German sense of honor left at all? They weren't surprised. The night before, the same soldier had refused to join the unit's Christmas service. Corporal Hitler was odd like that, but his disapproval reflected the general's view. This was exactly the situation that Field Marshal French had feared. Commanders dispatched senior officers to threaten disciplinary action and insist that the men restart the war. In some sectors, the armistice came to an orderly close. Officers from both sides saluted and fired revolvers into the air, signaling that, all right, the war was back on. In a few places, troops resisted until nearly to New Year's Eve, but the generals would not have it. German command dispatched snipers to break the ceasefire. French ordered an artillery barrage, letting the machinery of war roll over the human connections of the frontline troops. Nothing like this Christmas truce would happen again. The generals wouldn't allow it. On Christmas Eve 1915, British officers ordered a 24-hour artillery barrage. Men who tried to form a truce were court-martialed. Machine guns drowned out German carols. But the generals needn't have bothered. The spirit of that truce was unique to 1914, a
Yes.
symptom of a young war. By Christmas 1915, those troops had experienced chlorine gas and creeping bombardments. Zeppelins were bombing London. The Battle of Verdun would end just before the holiday, leaving 750,000 casualties. Indeed, many of the men who celebrated in no man's land that day would never see another Christmas. One of those unlucky ones was Lieutenant Sir Edward Hulse, who had sung carols and given a German officer his silk scarf. He died 3 months later while trying to save a wounded comrade. He was 25. And yet, Hulse is not remembered today for his military achievements, or even the book of letters that his friends published after his death. He and so many others are remembered for a victory entirely their own, when a group of brave men ventured into the line of fire, trusting their enemies not to shoot, and believing that humanity was better than the bonfire it had built for itself. Happy holidays, everybody.
It was a good video. That was a really good video. I don't know what else to add here at the end. I think I'm gonna cut it short here. Not gonna talk too much here at the end because it's Christmas. So I think I'm gonna add here, right here at the. My brain is a mess, man. So I'm gonna add here right at the end is hope you guys have a Merry Christmas if you celebrate it. If you don't, happy holidays, Happy New Year, have a good day. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. I'll see you guys, well, tomorrow because I upload daily. See you guys then. Peace.